the invisible habit of suffering. There is something so ordinary in your experience that it rarely gets questioned. It is not hidden. It is not subtle in the sense of being hard to detect. In fact, it is constantly present, and yet, because it is always there, it becomes invisible. From the moment you wake up, something begins. Before your body even fully moves, before the day has actually started, there is already activity. A thought, then another. A memory, a plan, a small concern, something unfinished, something expected. Within seconds, the quiet of waking dissolves into movement, and that movement feels normal. So normal that you do not question it. You assume, this is me. But if you look carefully, something interesting becomes visible. The thoughts are not stable. They change, they come and go, they contradict each other. They shift depending on mood, situation, memory. And yet, despite this constant change, you feel like there is something consistent, a sense of I, a center, a reference point. But what if that sense is not what you think it is? Let's slow down. Imagine a very simple moment. You are sitting somewhere. Nothing special is happening, no urgency, no immediate demand. There is just the environment, the body, the breath, the sounds around you, and then something appears, a thought. Later, I need to do this. It feels practical, reasonable, normal. Then another thought follows. And what if I don't have enough time? Now the tone has changed. There is a slight shift. The body responds, almost immediately. A small contraction, a tightening, a subtle sense of pressure. And now something else begins. More thoughts. What if it doesn't work out? I need to plan this properly. I should be more organized. And just like that, the moment is gone. You are no longer sitting. You are thinking. This transition is so fast that it feels seamless. There is no clear boundary, no moment where you say, now I am leaving reality and entering thought. It just happens, and because it happens so smoothly, you do not notice it. But if you look closely, something very important becomes clear. Nothing actually happened. The situation did not change. The environment did not change. The body did not need to react. Only thought appeared, and yet the experience changed completely, from neutral to slightly tense. This is the beginning of understanding, because it shows you something fundamental. You are not reacting to reality. You are reacting to interpretation. And this happens all the time. You are walking. A memory appears. The body reacts. You are waiting. A thought appears. The body reacts. You are alone. A feeling appears. A story appears. The body reacts. And every time, it feels real. Not because it is happening externally, but because the body is involved. This is why the illusion is so convincing. The mind produces a thought, the body responds, and together they create a full experience. And that experience is labeled, "This is happening to me." But if you slow it down step by step, something else becomes visible. First, there is a neutral moment, then a thought, then a reaction, then a story, then identification, and at each step, the intensity increases, not because reality is changing, but because interpretation is building. This is how suffering is created, not instantly, but gradually, layer by layer. And the most important layer is this: identification. The moment when a thought is no longer just a thought, but becomes, this is true, this is real, this is me. And from that moment, everything changes. Because now you are not observing the thought, you are inside it. And once you are inside it, you react to it as if it were reality. Now consider something even simpler. Right now, without thinking about the past, without imagining the future, is there a problem? Not as an idea, not as a concept, but in direct experience. Look carefully. There may be sensations, there may be sounds, there may be thoughts. But is there a problem that needs to be solved right now? Often the answer is no. And yet, within seconds, the mind can create one. It can bring a memory, it can imagine a scenario, it can generate tension. And suddenly, something feels wrong. This is the invisible habit, the habit of turning neutral moments into problems, not intentionally, not consciously, but automatically. And because it is automatic, it feels natural. But natural does not mean true. It simply means familiar. Now, there is something else happening at the same time, something even more subtle. Every time a thought appears, there is also awareness of it. You know the thought is there. Even if only for a brief moment, that knowing is different from the thought. The thought moves. The knowing does not. The thought changes. The knowing remains. This is the key, because it shows that you are not the thought. You are the awareness of it. But this is not something to believe. It is something to see directly. And the more clearly you see it, the less convincing the thoughts become. Not because they stop, but because they are no longer taken as absolute. This is the beginning of freedom. Not freedom from thought, but freedom from being controlled by it. And this is where the illusion of problem begins to break. Because a problem requires identification. It requires belief. It requires the assumption that what you are thinking is real. But when that assumption weakens, the entire structure begins to loosen. Not immediately, not completely, but enough to create space. And in that space, something new becomes possible. Not a solution, but a different way of seeing. And that is where this journey truly begins. The structure of a problem. If you look closely at what you call a problem, you may begin to notice that it is not as solid as it first appears. At first, it feels obvious. Something happened, you reacted, you feel tension, it seems direct. But if you slow it down, not conceptually, but in your actual experience, the structure begins to reveal itself. A problem does not appear all at once. It is built layer by layer. There is always a beginning, a simple moment, neutral, unremarkable, almost invisible in its simplicity. You are sitting in a room, you are walking outside, you are looking at your phone, you are listening to someone speak. Nothing in that moment by itself contains a problem. It is just experience. Then something enters, a thought. It can be very small, almost insignificant. This might be an issue. At first, nothing dramatic happens. It is just a thought. But then something else follows. Another thought. What if this becomes a problem? Now the tone begins to change. The body responds, subtly. A slight tightening, a shift in the breath, a narrowing of attention. Still, nothing external has changed, but internally, something has started. Then the next layer appears, interpretation. This is not good. And with that, the moment is no longer neutral. It has meaning, and that meaning carries weight. Now another layer is added. Time. The mind moves forward. What will happen if this continues? Now, the problem has a future, and with the future comes uncertainty, and with uncertainty comes tension. Now the structure is almost complete. There is one final layer. Identification. This is happening to me. And at that moment, the problem feels real. Not because the situation changed, but because the structure is complete. Thought to interpretation, to projection, to identification, and once this structure is in place, the body responds as if the problem is real. Because for the body, it is. The body does not distinguish between an imagined scenario and a physical event. It responds to signals, and thought is a signal. So the system activates, and now you feel stress, anxiety, pressure, urgency, and it feels justified. Because the structure has created a convincing experience. But if you step back, even slightly, something becomes visible. The problem is not a single thing, it is a process. And every part of that process can be observed. This is where something begins to shift, not by trying to stop the process, but by seeing it clearly, in real time. Let's take a very real situation. You receive a message, a short one. Can we talk later? Nothing else, no context, no explanation. At first, it is just information, but then the process begins. What does that mean? Then, something is wrong. Then, what did I do? And within seconds, your body reacts. Your chest tightens, your stomach contracts, your attention narrows. Now you are not just reading a message, you are inside a problem. But if you slow it down, what actually happened? Words appeared on a screen. That is all. Everything else was created. Thought added meaning. Thought created projection. Thought triggered reaction. And the body made it feel real. This is how powerful the structure is. And this is why it is rarely questioned. Because it does not feel like a construction. It feels like reality. Now, here is the important part. You cannot stop this structure by force. Trying to control thought is still part of the structure. Trying to eliminate fear is still part of the structure. Trying to fix the problem is still part of the structure, because all of these actions assume that the problem is real, and that assumption keeps it alive. So what changes it? Seeing. Not thinking about it, not analyzing it, but seeing it directly as it happens. The moment you notice, this is a thought, something shifts. Not dramatically, but enough. There is a small gap. And in that gap, the process weakens. Because it is no longer completely unconscious. Let's go even deeper. What gives the problem its intensity? It is not the first thought. It is the repetition. Thought comes back. Again and again and again. Each time it reinforces the structure, and each time the body responds, until the state becomes stable. Now you are not just thinking, you are in a problem. And at that point it feels like something must be done. You need to solve it, fix it, escape it. But here is the paradox. The more you try to solve it, the more attention you give it. And the more attention you give it, the stronger it becomes. Because attention is energy. Whatever you focus on grows in intensity. So the problem feeds on attention. Not intentionally, but naturally. This is why distraction sometimes feels like relief. Because attention moves away, but distraction does not resolve the structure. It only pauses it, and when attention returns, the structure rebuilds. So the question is not, how do I get rid of the problem? The question is, what is the problem made of? And when you see that clearly, something changes. Fundamentally, you realize that the problem does not exist as a solid thing. It exists as a sequence of events, and a sequence can be interrupted, not by force, but by awareness. Now something else becomes visible. Between thoughts, there are small gaps, very brief, almost unnoticeable, but real. And in those gaps, there is no problem, no tension, no identity, just presence. And the more attention rests there, the more those gaps become noticeable. Not because you are creating them, but because you are no longer filling them. This is where the structure begins to dissolve. Not completely, but enough to change your relationship with it. You begin to see problems not as absolute realities, but as temporary constructions. And that changes everything, because what is seen as a construction is no longer taken as truth, and what is no longer taken as truth loses its power, not instantly, but steadily. And this is how freedom begins. Not by removing problems from your life, but by seeing what they really are: control and fear. If you continue to observe the structure of what you call a problem, you eventually arrive at something that sits beneath almost all of it. Not the situation, not the thought, not even the immediate reaction, but something more constant, more subtle: control. At first, this may not be obvious, because control does not always feel like control. It often feels like responsibility, like awareness, like preparation. You want to understand what is happening. You want to make the right decision. you want to avoid unnecessary difficulty. All of this seems reasonable, and in certain situations, it is. But look more carefully. There is a difference between practical action and psychological control. Practical action happens when something needs to be done. You respond to a real situation. You take steps. You move. Then it ends. But psychological control does not end. It continues even when nothing is required. It continues in thought. You plan what might happen. You replay what already happened. You imagine what could go wrong. And this creates a continuous background of tension. Now, look at a simple example. You are waiting for something. A response, a result, a decision. Nothing is happening yet. But internally, there is movement. What if it doesn't work out? What if something goes wrong? I need to be ready. The body responds, not to reality, but to projection. And this projection is driven by control, the need to make sure that things go a certain way. But here is the fundamental problem. Life does not follow your internal plan. It cannot. It is too complex, too dynamic, too unpredictable. And so every time reality moves in a way that does not match expectation, there is friction. That friction is experienced as stress, but the stress is not coming from reality. It is coming from the attempt to control reality. Now go even deeper. Why is there a need to control? If you stay with this question without answering it immediately, something begins to reveal itself. Control is not the root. It is a response to something more fundamental, fear. But not always the kind of fear you recognize, not necessarily fear of something specific. More often, it is the fear of not knowing, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of not being able to predict what will happen next. This fear is subtle. It does not always feel like fear. Sometimes it feels like restlessness, sometimes like urgency, sometimes like the need to figure things out. But at its core, it is the same movement, a discomfort with not knowing. And so the mind tries to compensate. It creates scenarios. If this happens, then I will do that. If this goes wrong, I need to be prepared. What is the safest outcome? And each scenario creates a response in the body, even though none of them are real. Because for the body, thought is enough. A thought about danger triggers the same response as actual danger. This is why anxiety can feel so intense, because it is not just thinking. It is a full body experience. Now something very important becomes visible. The mind is trying to create certainty in an uncertain world. And that is impossible. No amount of thinking can make the future predictable. No amount of planning can remove uncertainty completely. And yet, the mind continues to try, because it believes that control will remove discomfort. But it does the opposite. It creates continuous tension. Now look at this moment, right now. Is the future happening? No. Is the past happening? No. There is only this. And in this moment, without referring to time, there is usually no problem. But the mind cannot stay here for long. It moves into the future and brings back uncertainty. And with uncertainty comes fear, and with fear comes control, and with control comes tension. This is the loop. Future to uncertainty to fear to control to tension to more thought. And it repeats over and over. Now, the question is not how to stop the loop, because trying to stop it is still part of the loop. The question is, can you see it as it happens right now? Can you notice the moment when thought moves into the future? Can you notice the slight contraction in the body? Can you notice the impulse to figure it out? If you can see that clearly, something shifts, not because you stopped it, but because you are no longer completely inside it. There is space, and in that space, something else becomes possible. Not control, but allowing. Allowing uncertainty to exist, allowing not knowing, allowing the moment to be incomplete. At first, this may feel uncomfortable because the mind is used to closure. It wants answers, it wants resolution, but if you stay with the discomfort without immediately escaping into thought, something begins to change. The discomfort softens, the body relaxes, the need to control decreases, not because the situation changed, but because resistance decreased. This is a crucial insight. You are not trying to remove uncertainty. You are learning to exist without resisting it. And when resistance is gone, uncertainty is no longer threatening. It is just open, alive, unresolved. And that is the nature of life, always changing, always unfolding, never fully predictable. Now something else becomes clear. The need for control was never about reality. It was about how you relate to it. And when that relationship changes, everything changes. Not externally, internally. You begin to trust the moment more than your thoughts about it. You begin to respond instead of react. You begin to see that most of what you were trying to control never needed to be controlled, and in that realization a large part of tension disappears, not because life is easier, but because you are no longer fighting it, the space you avoid. There is something in your experience that you rarely allow yourself to fully encounter. It is not because it is hidden, it is not because it is complicated, it is because it feels unfamiliar, and anything unfamiliar is quickly interpreted as something to avoid. This appears most clearly in the moments when nothing is happening, when the day slows down, when activity stops, when there is no immediate demand. You are no longer solving anything, no longer responding, no longer distracted. And in that moment, something subtle begins to emerge. At first, it is barely noticeable. A slight discomfort, a vague sense that something is missing. It does not have a clear shape. It does not have a clear cause, but it is there. And almost immediately, the mind reacts. It begins to move. You reach for your phone, you open something, you start doing something, not because you consciously decided to escape, but because staying feels uncomfortable. Now, look at this very carefully. Nothing has actually gone wrong. There is no problem. There is just the absence of activity. And yet, that absence feels like something needs to be filled. This is what is usually called loneliness. But this word can be misleading, because what you are experiencing is not necessarily the absence of people, it is the absence of distraction. And without distraction, something deeper becomes visible. At first, it feels like emptiness, a hollow space, a lack, and the mind immediately labels it. This is not good. I should not feel this. I need to change this. And the movement away begins. But what if you don't move? What if, just for a moment, you stay? Not forcing anything, not trying to fix anything, just remaining with what is there. At first, the discomfort may increase, because there is no escape, no distraction to soften it. It becomes more noticeable, more present. It may feel like pressure, or heaviness, or openness without structure, and the mind will try again. Do something, think something, change something. But if you remain, without following that impulse, something unexpected begins to happen. The sensation starts to change. Not because you are changing it, but because you are no longer resisting it. What felt solid begins to move. What felt heavy begins to soften. What felt empty begins to open. And slowly, very subtly, the quality of the experience shifts. What was interpreted as emptiness reveals itself as space, not a lack, but an openness, a field, something that is not filled with objects, but is not negative, just open. This is unfamiliar because the mind is used to content, thoughts, stories, objects, identities. It is used to something being there, and when there is nothing to hold on to, it interprets that as a problem. But if you stay longer, without trying to define it, something deeper becomes clear. This space is not empty in the way you thought. It is alive. There is a quiet presence within it, not created, not constructed, simply revealed. And this presence does not depend on anything. It is not affected by thought, not affected by emotion, not affected by external circumstances. Thoughts may come and go, sensations may change, but this underlying presence remains. And the more attention rests here, the more familiar it becomes. What was once uncomfortable becomes natural. What was once avoided becomes a place of rest. Now, something important shifts. The need for constant distraction begins to weaken, not because you force yourself to stop, but because you no longer need it. You begin to notice how often you were escaping, scrolling, checking, filling silence. Not because you wanted to, but because you didn't know how to stay. Now you begin to stay, and staying reveals something essential. There is nothing wrong with this moment, nothing missing, nothing to fix, only the absence of noise. And that absence is not a problem, and it is clarity. Now something even deeper becomes visible. As you remain in this space, you may notice that the usual sense of you becomes less defined. At first, this can feel unusual because you are used to being someone, a thinker, a doer, a center of experience. But here, in this openness, that structure softens. There is still experience, but the sense of ownership becomes lighter. There is seeing, but no clear seer. There is feeling, but no clear feeler. There is presence without a defined center, and this is not something to understand. It is something that becomes obvious when you stop trying to hold on to identity. At first, the mind may resist this. It may try to re-establish control, to define, to label, to understand. But if you do not follow that movement, it fades, and what remains is simplicity. Just this, without the need to become anything, without the need to fix anything, without the need to fill anything. This is the space you were avoiding, not because it is negative, but because it has no structure for the mind to hold. And now it becomes clear, this space is not a problem. It is what remains when the problem-making stops. And in that, there is a quiet sense of completeness, not because something was added, but because nothing is missing, the illusion of the observer. As your attention becomes more stable, more present, more grounded in direct experience, something very subtle begins to take shape. At first, it feels like clarity. You notice thoughts as thoughts, you notice sensations as sensations, you notice reactions as movements in the body. And with this noticing, there is space. There is less identification, less automatic involvement, less reactivity. And within that space, a new sense appears. I am the one who is aware. It feels quiet, stable, more real than thought, more grounded than emotion, and compared to being lost in thinking, it feels like freedom. You are no longer the voice in your head. You are the one who hears it. This is an important step, but it is not the final one. Because if you stay here, something remains unnoticed. The sense of being an observer, a center, a position, subtle but present. Now look at this very carefully, this sense of I am the one who is aware. What is it exactly? Is it a thought? Sometimes it appears as one. I am aware, and then it disappears. So it cannot be that. Is it a sensation? You might feel it somewhere, in the head, in the chest, but sensations come and go. So it cannot be that. Is it a feeling of presence? Perhaps, but even that changes, deepens, softens, shifts. Anything that changes cannot be the stable center. So look again, without trying to define it, without trying to hold on to it. Just look. There is awareness. That is undeniable. There is knowing. Experience is happening, but where is the one who owns it? Where is the observer? Can you find it? As something solid, something fixed, something separate from what is observed? If you search honestly without jumping to conclusions, something very surprising begins to reveal itself. The observer cannot be found. There is no separate entity sitting behind experience watching it. There is just experience and the knowing of it. Without separation, this can feel strange at first, because it goes against everything you are used to. You are used to being someone, a center, a reference point. But here, that center dissolves. Not through effort, not through force, but through seeing. It was never there as a separate thing. It was an assumption, a subtle construction, and once seen, it cannot hold in the same way. Now, something shifts profoundly. Before, there was always a position. I am thinking, I am feeling, I am observing. Now even that begins to fall away. There is just thinking, just feeling, just observing, without an owner, without a center, without a separate me. And this is not a loss, it is a release, because with the center, there was always effort. Effort to maintain identity, effort to control experience, effort to understand everything. Without that center, the effort is no longer necessary. Life continues. Thoughts appear. Emotions arise. Situations unfold. But they are no longer happening to someone. They are simply happening. And this changes everything. Not externally, internally. There is a lightness, a simplicity, a sense that nothing needs to be held together, because nothing is separate. Now the mind may try to return, to rebuild a center, to say, I understand this. I have realized something. I am now in a different state. But notice, this is the same movement again, creating identity, turning experience into a position, and if you see that, it dissolves again. This is why this cannot be held. It cannot be turned into knowledge. It cannot be turned into a belief. It is only clear when you are not trying to define it. And in that clarity, there is no need to define anything, because nothing is missing. Now something becomes completely obvious. The entire structure of problem required a center, a me to whom something is happening, a me who is affected, a me who needs to fix it. But without that center, what is a problem? A situation, yes, something can happen. But without identification, without resistance, without ownership, it is just what is happening. Not a problem, just a movement, and it passes. This is the deepest shift. Not fixing life, not improving yourself, but seeing that the one who needed fixing was never what you thought. And when that is clear, something becomes very quiet, not empty, not blank, but deeply still. There is no urgency, no pressure, no need to get anywhere, because there is nowhere to go. There is no distance, there is only this, and this is not lacking, it is complete, without needing to be completed. Nothing is missing. At some point, very quietly, without any clear boundary, something comes to an end. Not an event, not a realization you can point to, but a movement. A movement that has been present for as long as you can remember. The movement of becoming. For most of your life, there has been a subtle direction towards something, a better state, more clarity, less tension, a sense that something is not yet complete. Even when things were going well, that movement remained in the background, almost unnoticed. I can go further. There is more to understand. I need to reach something. And that movement shaped everything. How you think, how you feel, how you relate to life. It created a constant forward motion. And with that motion came effort. Effort to change, effort to improve, effort to become. But now something becomes visible, not as a concept, but directly. This movement is not coming from reality. It is coming from thought, from the assumption that something is missing. So look carefully, right now. Without referring to anything outside this moment, is something missing? Not in imagination, not in memory, here, now. There may be sensations, there may be sounds, there may be thoughts. But is there an actual lack? If you look honestly, without rushing to answer, something becomes undeniable. The sense of lack is not in the moment, it is added by thought. And when this is seen clearly, the movement of becoming begins to fade, not because you stop it, but because it no longer makes sense. You cannot continue searching. When it is obvious that nothing is missing, and this is not a conclusion, it is not something you hold on to, it is what remains. When the search falls away, now something else becomes clear. There was never a distance. There was never a place you needed to reach. There was only attention, moving into thought, becoming identified, and then returning. Again and again. And what you called progress was simply less time being lost. Until even that idea disappears, because there is no one progressing. There is only awareness, always here, always present, not created, not achieved, just unnoticed, and now not overlooked. This is why it feels like coming home, not because you arrived somewhere new, but because you stopped leaving. And in that, there is rest, not a temporary calm, not a state you maintain, but a natural ease, because the effort to hold everything together is no longer there. Life continues, nothing stops, the body moves, thoughts appear, emotions arise, situations unfold, but something fundamental is no longer present. The constant resistance, the constant need to interpret, the constant attempt to make things different. And without that, everything feels lighter, not because life became easier, but because the extra weight is gone. Now, there is no urgency, no pressure to fix anything, no need to reach a different moment. This moment is not a step toward something. It is complete, exactly as it is, and that completeness does not come from adding anything. It comes from seeing that nothing is missing. The mind may still ask questions. What about my life? What about my goals? What about my future? But these questions arise from the old structure, the one that believes that fulfillment is somewhere else. And now it becomes clear. Nothing real is missing here. Life will still move, Decisions will happen, actions will happen, but they are no longer driven by the same tension. They arise naturally from clarity, not from fear, not from lack. And this changes everything, not in appearance, but in experience. There is a quiet simplicity, nothing special, nothing extraordinary, just this: breathing, sensations, sound, awareness, unfolding, without needing to be controlled, without needing to be understood, without needing to be completed. And in that, there is peace. Not because something was solved, but because nothing needed to be. Now, if you look back, you may see something clearly. All along, you thought you had a problem, something to fix, something to resolve. But what was actually happening was much simpler. There was thought. There was belief in that thought. There was reaction. And from that, the sense of problem appeared. But the problem itself was never solid. It was constructed moment by moment, and now seen clearly, it no longer holds in the same way. Nothing dramatic has happened. Nothing was gained. Nothing was lost. And yet everything is different, because the illusion is no longer taken as reality, and what remains is what was always here: simple, open, complete. This moment as it is, and that is enough.